Here, let's look at the previous front and back pieces. Both use knitted fabric. The one on top is the front piece. The ones below are the two back pieces turned inside out. At the back opening, this position requires a 7 mm seam. The rest have the standard 5 mm Next are the sleeves. The top two form one group. The bottom two form a group and must each be sewn separately. Only after sewing them together is the sleeve. The new color uses knitted fabric. The white fabric is a standard 60 count cotton. Here I'm using Suishi cotton. Next is the cuff. The cuff is made of ribbed fabric. Also, this is flipped inside out from left to right. Remember to mark the points above. These parts all have the standard 5 mm seam allowance. Next is the ribbing of the hem. This is the ribbing on the hem. I am using the main fabric. It's the same knitted fabric as the front and back outer layers. No ribbed fabric is used. Cut directly according to the measurements given on the pattern. No seam allowance if you like. You can also use ribbed fabric. Fold it in half before using. Next is the lace around the neckline and the part with the binding strips. The binding strips should follow the measurements. Add this styling to all four sides. As for this size, it is larger than the actual size. I want to make it a bit longer. After finishing the measurement later, just trim off the excess parts. Next is the lace part. Because the lace is at the very bottom, it has a finished edge. It has its own lace, so that position over there does not require additional allowance. But the long edge on top of it, we need to add a 5 mm allowance ourselves. And it's two sides. We need to add 7 mm in style. Here, let's start by making pleats on these two cotton sleeves. The pleats are on the straight lines along both sides of the sleeve. Both sides feature double line pleats. So altogether, 4 edges need to be pleated. Next, I'll first insert a section here. It's the position at the very top of the sleeve. Both this position and the one below have curved shapes. After folding, it will look more alike. It becomes easy to mix them up. So we can mark the top position ourselves. Wait, this position is joined together with this position. Otherwise, it might sometimes be easy to tip over. Then we'll do a tuck pleat. The tuck pleat is a double line tuck. It is on the left and right sides of this stitching line. Measure a tuck line every 2 mm. Extend the thread ends on both sides a bit longer. Do not backstitch at the front and After back. Measuring the tuck lines on both sleeves, they look like this. Then we take out the other sleeve from this set. After measuring the fold on this edge, it should match the dimension here. After measuring the fold on this edge, it should match the dimension of this side edge. The other set is the same. After measuring the fold here, it should match the dimension. Then the dimensions on both sides are even. Then we take the 4 edges where we just measured the lines and pinch each fold slightly. Here, we simultaneously tighten the 2 baselines. Then use your left hand to pull the fabric to the left, like this. Then we adjust based on the position mentioned earlier. We properly adjust the size after measuring the fold. The middle position will be directly sewn later, so we won't handle it for now. But on the other side, this strip, it's just this relatively short line. We need to tie knots at both ends of it because this edge will be sewn later on. So we secure it first. It's the 2 lines on the front and the 2 lines on the back. Just tie a double knot between them. Both ends are the same. Be careful when tying the knot. Don't pull the fabric so it gets deformed. You just need to secure this thread end. The 2 lines at the other end on this side are handled the same way. Now, let's take a look at the position on the other side. Here, we'll take this piece of fabric and sew them together with the right sides facing each other. Check after measuring. If there is no problem, then remove the basting stitches at this position. Then unfold the two pieces of fabric. The seam underneath should face the stitched side of the fabric. We sew a top stitch along the edge of this fabric. After finishing, the back looks like this and the front looks like that. If you think the seam allowance at the back is too thick, you can trim this seam allowance a little bit. Be careful not to cut the fabric itself. Next, we will work on this position at the bottom to measure the drawstring. It's also a double drawstring. After pulling and folding at this position, it matches the size of our cuff. But you need to pay attention. There's a marking point on this cuff. This marking point indicates the junction of these two different fabrics, the spot where they are joined in the middle. It needs to be aligned. The cuffs need to be folded over before use. Let's fold it over first. Use an iron to press and shape the fold position. Note that the folded in part of the cuff is the fabric's reverse side. The side facing up is the front side. This was already explained in the previous color slides. We draw this pattern on the front side of the fabric. Then place the cuff like this, as I'm doing. Place the fold facing our side. Then have the opening facing upwards. The narrower half of the cuff marking point is aligned together with this white fabric. The wider half is aligned together with the genuine woven fabric. So this cuff on the right side corresponds to the sleeve underneath. Here, we mainly distinguish the left and right cuffs. Then we properly adjust the size of this part. Align the stitching position with the marker points. Confirm there are no issues. Then we handle this ribbing. Place it on the front side of this sleeve fabric. Align edge to edge. Sew along the seam line 5 millimeters from the edge. After measuring, double check yourself to ensure there are no issues. First, when sewing later, you need to fold this sleeve downward like this. Pay attention when sewing the armhole positions of the front and back pieces together. The white half corresponds to our front piece. These parts should be aligned at this position. Then we use the same method to finish the other sleeve as well. After finishing both sleeves separately, they look like this. So let's sew the front and back pieces together, right sides facing each other, stitching at the pointed seam. After measuring, unfold the front and back pieces and press the seam allowance of the middle pointed seam open to both sides. Then turn to the right side and top stitch a line on each side of the pointed seam. If you choose not to, just press it flat. After top stitching on the right side, it looks like this. If you sew top stitching, you can turn to the wrong side and trim the excess seam allowance here. Leave about a 3 millimeter seam allowance. Then we'll attach the neckline lace, which needs to be gathered with thread. This is also a double stitch drawstring. Using 3 to 4 is acceptable. After drawing, the size matches the neckline circumference. The seam allowance at the back opening here is 7 millimeters. The seam allowance on both sides of the lace is also 7 millimeters. Be sure to align this 7 millimeter mark. When sewing here, the fabric underneath faces up and the lace on top also faces up. At the start and end, about 1.5 centimeters should remain unfolded. We sew directly along the upper and lower style lines. When sewing, you must watch out for the fabric underneath is knit fabric. When sewing, avoid stretching or deforming the neckline below. If you stretch and deform it, the neckline will end up being very large after sewing. So we definitely need to pay attention to this issue. After measuring and confirming there's no problem, remove this gathering stitch line. Then take out our binding strip and fold one edge inward along the seam line toward the wrong side. We press the edge to set its shape. Then turn the garment inside out. Align the unpressed long edge with the seam line around the neckline below and sew them together. Be careful at this step not to stretch and distort the knitted fabric underneath. After measuring, trim off the excess parts. Then we trim the seam allowance here, leaving about 2 to 3 millimeters. Otherwise, there would be too much seam allowance here, making it difficult to encase. Then we turn to the front and fold this back binding strip upward. The pressed crease at the front is just right to fold down like this. It covers the stitching line around the lace at the neckline. Then we secure it with stitching here on the front. After processing, it looks like this. Next, let's attach the sleeves. First, pay attention to distinguishing the sleeves left and right sides. These parts are all positioned with the front side facing up. We need to align this white piece with this position on the front. That is, the left piece should be sewn together with the left sleeve. Sew this piece on the right side together with the sleeve seam on the right side. We place the right side, align the starting points. The upper and lower curves are different, so we adjust the curvature as we sew. Align the stitching position with the pointed seam here. After measuring, we flip it to the front to take a look. The sleeve looks like this. Then sew the other sleeve using the same method. After sewing both sleeves, this is how it looks from the front. Then, if you want a smoother seam, we can measure the top stitching here. When measuring the top stitching, the bottom seam allowance faces the neckline. After measuring the top stitching on both sides, then we join this position of the front and back pieces together. Measure straight from the hem down to the cuff. The same position applies to the other side as well. After measuring both sides, we make several notches on the side seam at the armpit area. Then we turn both sleeves to the front to inspect. If there are no issues, let's remove the last basting stitch on this sleeve. Specifically, we'll undo the basting stitch that we knotted earlier. Next, let's work on the hem. Fold the hem fabric in half and press it with an iron. The side folded in is the wrong side facing up is the After front. Ironing it well, leave a 5mm seam allowance on the side with the opening. Draw a line. This line is 5mm away from the opening. These 5mm are our seat seam allowance. Take out our jacket. Spread out the front and back. Align the ribbed hem and the fabric underneath with their right sides facing each other. The upper part here, its horizontal fold faces to the left. The opening faces to the right. We sew along this seam line. Be careful while sewing this ribbed hem section. It is slightly shorter than the fabric beneath it. So we sew it while pulling it open slightly as we sew. After sewing, the top and bottom dimensions are just right. During the sewing process, we encounter a lower seam area. This seam needs to be spread apart to both sides. After sewing, it looks like this. Then we fold this part down like this. Measure a visible stitch line along this hem. It's also okay not to measure. Sewing it will make it neater. After sewing, it looks like this. Now let's put the Velcro on both sides. Here I'm using a fairly large piece of Velcro. In fact, it's an even bigger piece. I've already cut it into smaller pieces here because when using this large piece of Velcro, after everything is done, its two sides are merged together. The back will be relatively thin because this set of ours, it also has an outer cover. If we talk about the inner back opening, it tends to be thicker where the layers overlap. Then there's an outer cover layer. So I think the back overall will feel a bit thicker. I suggest using this method inside. Everyone can also adjust it according to their own needs. If you want it to overlap inside, regarding this alignment, then you need to add it yourself. You have to add it right from the beginning. This is noted on my blueprint. Next, let's first examine the harder side of this Velcro. Here, one side is smooth, the other side is rough. The smooth side is facing up. The opening at the back underneath is also facing upwards. Keep the overall orientation and flip one side like this. Because on this side, we can see the seam allowance. Directly along this seam allowance from bottom to top. This is the pillar seam line at the back opening. Align the fabric edge with the edge of the Velcro underneath. After sewing, let's check the front. It looks like this. Then fold this Velcro down like this. Then at the edge of this fabric, sew a line on each side at 1mm and 5mm. After sewing, the front looks like this. Then we'll trim the excess Velcro. Then we'll trim this Velcro. For the lower lily neckline, it should be flush with this fabric. Then the longer edge here, we leave a 7mm margin. That is, this Velcro extends 7mm beyond the fabric edge. After trimming, you will see that the corner is quite sharp. Round off this sharp corner. Rounding it off makes it less likely to scratch this base figure. The inside of this side, this area is also sharp. It also needs to be trimmed. This way, the Velcro on this side is properly attached. The side facing up now is the rough side. Next, we take the other piece, the soft side of this Velcro, and stick it on the other side, the opening on the back. This piece of Velcro also has one flat side. The other piece has more of the fuzzy side. The fuzzy side faces up. Place it directly onto the front side of the fabric underneath. Similarly, maintain this orientation. We turn it inside out. Sew along this 7mm stitch line. When sewing here, the fabric edge and the edge of the Velcro underneath are also aligned. After finishing the sewing, fold the Velcro down in this manner. Also along the fabric edge at 1 millimeter and 5 millimeters. Sew a line at each point. 2 lines. After tightening, it looks like this. Then when trimming this part, we directly follow the edge of the fabric to cut off the excess Velcro. Be a little careful. Don't cut into the fabric itself. Then we turn it over to the back side. Fold this side towards the Velcro on the other side. Cover it up like this. Merge them together in this way. This area is relatively thinner. Let's look at the upper part of the skirt here. After drawing the pattern clearly on the fabric, then the front sides of the upper and lower fabric pieces after sewing are placed facing each other. However, since this is a single piece, combining the front and back to the back, for example, with stripes like mine, if you look at the back, they slant like this. If this bothers you, just fold this part of the pattern in half. Cut it open horizontally. Then draw the front and back pieces separately. After finishing the drawing, unfold it at the front, opposite the seam and dart. It's basically the same as this integrated type. If you use solid colored fabric, then you don't have to worry about it. Or if, like me, you don't care. I simply don't mind and paint directly. Then the top and bottom parts here are the outer lining fabric. Using the same fabric. It's also fine to use the same fabric. I have more of this fabric here. I just cut it casually. I didn't take any additional lining but fabric. You need to pay attention. Our outer fabric and lining should not exceed this thickness of 60 yarn count. Thin cotton fabric would be better. Next is the hem of the skirt. For this skirt hem, we fold 2 layers together into pleats, essentially folding them together, using them as a single layer. Then I tore the bottom edge. Tearing it creates this frayed edge. And as for the bottom edge, I specifically want this frayed edge. So I don't fold it in. So I don't need to add seam allowance to the bottom edge. Except for the bottom edge, the other 3 edges need a standard 5 millimeter seam. However, if some ladies, you don't finish the bottom edge with a raw edge, then you should follow the dimensions given on my drawing as usual. Add a 5 millimeter seam allowance on all 4 sides. You can fold and finish the bottom edge inward yourself later. Stack the front pieces of the 2 skirts together. Place the shorter one as the top layer. The 2 back pieces are the same. The top edge needs to be aligned because I didn't draw the seam allowance here. So I'm worried that some might take one piece and draw it for you. It's the 2 sides and the top edge. We need to add additional seam allowance. The bottom is treated with a raw edge. No need to fold in and finish the edge. The very bottom here, I did not add the dimensions provided on the pattern are the measurements within this red line area. The seam allowances at the edges are added separately by myself. The other parts are all the same. Now, I'll explain how to tear off this rough edge. Just make a small cut on the edge, then tear it off forcefully like this. If you think this rough edge you prefer a bit more, you can pull off a few more wires from it. Let's work on the pocket section here. First, outline the pocket on the fabric like this. Be careful with the upper part of the pocket. Make sure to leave at least a 7 millimeter seam allowance. Leave a little extra. Let's fold it so it's easy to crease later. After finishing the fold, if there are extra parts, just trim them off. The pattern is drawn on the front side of the fabric. Then we sew lace in a half circle from this point to here. Just align the lace evenly with the starting position. The exposed part of the lace faces to the left. The seat seam faces to the right when there is a curved section in the lane. If you find it difficult to turn, you can sew 1 or 2 bar tacks on the seam allowance of the lace but don't sew them too deeply. Be careful not to cut through the lace. Both sides should be level with the topmost straight line. Trim away the excess part of the lace. Then we take out another piece of fabric. We sew the 2 pieces of fabric with their front sides facing sewing, each other. I flip it to this side to show you. This is when we sew, sewing continuously from this point to this point. Sew both sides of this seam allowance 7 millimeters upwards. Also, when we sew, simply sew along the lace stitching line below as done earlier. Trim it after sewing. At the top, leave the 7 millimeter seam allowance as originally agreed. Leave a seam allowance of about 2 to 3 millimeters, but you need to pay attention to the other areas because there is lace inside. So when making the notch cuts, we need to cut straight inward like this. You can't simply say to cut it with lace scissors, because the sewing of this kind of elastic lace, if you try to cut it with lace scissors, in the end, if you tug the lace slightly, the lace will unravel. Then we turn the pocket to the front side, smooth it out, and press it yourself. Sew along the seam line at the top position. Fold toward the reverse side. After folding, stitch the edge inward along the starting area will be a bit thicker. It's easy to say that this is just staying in place. Put a piece of fabric behind this pressed corner. A piece of fabric with roughly the same thickness. Let's turn it over and check the back. You can trim the excess seam allowance here. Leave about 3 millimeters. That will be tight enough. After finishing the front step, looks like this. Set it aside for now. Let's sew the upper part of the skirt. Because the stitch lines I drew on the fabric aren't very clear, I first laid out the pattern for reference. To explain where I will sew, first at the neckline circle's start and end points, we leave a 5 millimeter seam allowance outward. Next, at the embroidered gathering spots on both sides, the start and end points also have a 5 millimeter seam allowance. The red stitch line I drew extending outward marks the 5 millimeters area that must also be sewn. When sewing, place the 2 fabric pieces right sides together. Then sew directly along the 3 positions I mentioned. After sewing, we cut off the upper part of the skirt. For unsewn areas, we leave a 5 millimeter seam allowance. For sewn areas, we trim using pinking shears. If you don't have pinking shears, just use regular scissors to snip at the curved areas. After trimming, it looks like this. Next, pinch the back fabric from between the 2 front fabric pieces, pull it forward, and fold it over. If you're concerned about the fabric stretching when pinning, pin it at the seam where the 2 fabrics are joined near the edge. Once folded, clean up all the edges and corners of the seam we just stitched, then press it with an iron. After finishing, it looks like this. Here we take the first and second layers of the front piece of the skirt hem and align them together. Both are facing upwards. The back piece is done the same way. Both are stacked together like this. Then we follow the position of the 5mm edge line at the top. Test the pulled thread. Here, 2 threads are pulled as well. Do not sew back stitches. First, I use setting 4. Leave the thread ends a bit longer. After tightening this properly, pull tight both bottom threads. Pull this tuck out. The 2 back pieces are handled the same way. After pleating the front piece, it is the same size as this position. Adjust it yourself a bit. After pleating the back piece, it is the same size as this position on the back. The other back piece is the same. Then we first fold the bottom edge of this lining. Fold it inward along the 5mm stitch line. Press the edge lightly with an iron. I didn't include this stitch line at the front. I redrew it myself later on. Let me make it easier to explain this position to everyone. Heat pressing causes creases. The 2 positions at the back are the same. Fold the lining inward here. Previously, we handled the hem of the lining fabric. Now let's work on the hem of the outer fabric. Place it directly so that its right side faces the right side along of the upper and lower side. Be careful with the paper seam and the outer aside and don't worry about it. After finishing, flip it to the front and check it. If there's no problem, remove the gathering stitch in the front. Repeat the same steps for the 2 positions at the back. Join it together with the thick piece of the skirt hem. After stitching all parts together, pay attention to size like chalou or slightly larger. We need to trim the seam allowance at the 3 positions we just trim it slightly. Leave about 2 to 3 millimeters. Because the side seam positions of these 2 sizes are somewhat narrow. With so many pleats, it's not easy to wrap. If it's other sizes, you don't Since I'm working on other sizes now, I don't concern myself. Now let's take a look. The position of the side seam beneath the embroidered spread out the lining and outer fabric like this. This is the upper section of the skirt. Fold the lining down this way to cover the outer fabric. The bottom edge of the lining was previously folded and pressed. The crease position and the seam position of the skirt hem need to align perfectly together. Then we sew a stitching line 5 millimeters along fold the down edge and sew to here, but we need to pay attention when sewing this area. It's right between the 2 layers of fabric. We need to insert a bag inside. This is our binding bag. The thickness of this bag you can choose based on your preference. I'm using a rather thick one. If it's thicker, we can fold it like this before using it. Or if you prefer, you can also just use a thin bag directly. Place the bag right here. Then we take this lining on the back, fold it up, and then fold it down like this, just like the position we agreed on earlier. Then sew a top stitch 5 millimeters along the edge. The bag's position is exactly to place it between the lining and the outer part. This upper part, just beside this seam, is fine. After sewing here, flipping it to the front looks like this. Then we repeat the steps. Handle these 2 positions at the front and also this position on the back side. All should be treated in the same way. Pay attention to these 3 positions. All need a bag inserted, just like before. After attaching these 4 bags, it looks like this. Next, let's address the opening at the back. This area is treated the same as before, but there is one difference. That is, there's no need to add a bag. Just stitch it up directly. After sewing the shape at the top right angle position, trim it at an angle. Use the same method. Also handle the back opening on the other side. After finishing, flip these 2 areas to the front. Tidy up and iron the edges and corners yourself. Now, the front and back sides look like this. Next, the bottom edge on the back side, it remains divided. Here we have 2 methods. One method is using the long stitch to sew the fold position and the stitch line position together. Another method is to tidy up this side and wrap it neatly, then turn it to the front side. Sew the inner layer up to secure this position. Apply the same method to the 2 identical positions at the back. After finishing, it looks like this. Then we need to take the front and back fold pieces. The underside of the skirt's hem inward on both sides, because we haven't finished handling this side yet. All the side edges neatly yourself. Then we measure the top stitching at this position. Also, measure the top stitching on both sides at this position. This is how it looks after all the visible threads are removed. Then, you'll take care of the 2 openings at the back shortly. Test with Velcro or sew on hidden buttons. It's better if there is a snap position. You need to overlap them like this. Finally, take the pocket part we made earlier at the front, place it along the edge at the front chest, and sew it inward to secure it. After sewing, it looks like this. Then we tie the front and back pockets together. This part of the styling is now finished. Here, let's take a look at the pants' cut pieces. The 2 back pieces are on the left side. The 2 front pieces on the right side are both reversed. In a moment, when we join the pieces together, it's just one front piece, one back piece grouped in pairs like this. When stitching together, sew the front sides of these 2 positions together. These 2 pieces here are the same. Then, at the edge of the horizontal line at the bottom of the front piece, there is a marker point. This marker point needs to be marked in the same position. There is also a marker point at this position on the back because it happens to be at this sharp corner. So I didn't make a mark. It's enough to know this is the position. When we stitch later on, the positions of these 2 markers need to be aligned. Then this position on the front and back pieces, you join them together. This line can be aligned. These 2 lines, we take the position of these 2 lines as the reference. Prepare a strip like this for it. The size of this strip matches the size of this position, but you can leave the ends a little longer. We'll trim it after sewing the side seams. You need to add extra seam allowance on the 2 long edges. Also, the waistband at the very top of these pants needs a bit more seam allowance in this part. My blueprint specifies how much to leave. You can follow what's written on your own blueprint. The positions of these 4 waistband pieces all have the same allowance, except for these few positions. The seam allowances at all other positions are There is a reference for this decoration on our drawing. This is the lace trim we will use later. We will fold it into this kind of shape. This does not require cutting the fabric. We will handle it later. Also, these pants of ours have a distinction between the front and back parts. If you're worried about not being able to tell them apart, you can mark these parts yourself and make your own marks. If you can tell the difference, then it's not here. We first position the front and back pieces facing each other. We sew them together. Once the fronts are aligned, the curvature becomes different. So we need to sew carefully as we go. Adjust it along the curve from top to bottom. Cut straight from top to bottom until you reach the marked point. These two marked points on the two mold plates, they need to be perfectly aligned. Just be sure to cut up to the marked point. Just stop backstitching. No need to continue further. Then we unfold the two fabric pieces. The seam in the middle is pressed open to both sides. We did not sew this section of the bottom opening, but we also need to make the seam on this side. Fold neatly along the seam line because this area has a curve, so you can take out the blueprint in front of you. Here I'm using stiff cardboard, so you can directly press this edge area while ironing. This way, the curve will come out easily, or you can simply fold it directly. After ironing, turn it to the front side and check for any issues. If there are no problems, we will iron this area on the other side in the same way. After ironing, pay attention to one issue. There are two marking points at the very bottom here. You can see it on the blueprint. Mark the positions of these 2 points. Mark them at this position on the front side. When we attach the lace later, the edge position of this lace, it aligns perfectly with this marking point. The other side is the same. When we do the final sewing, we neatly cut this lace. The front side of the lace is facing up. I didn't put any markers on my side. Just make sure to align the marker yourselves. The bottom edge of the lace and the part underneath, the fabric edge of the pant leg is perfectly aligned. Then we pin both sides to secure them. Sew the top stitch directly from top to bottom. Both sides need to be stitched. You can secure this lace while sewing. After stretching it properly, we can trim the excess lace. Just about 4 to 5 millimeters away from the seam line is fine. Repeat the steps to properly finish both the left and right. Here, let's add this decoration to the pant leg. On the left pant leg, I created a bow decoration. I'll mark the bow's position here. Later, sew the bow on. On the right pant leg, I created a cross strap decoration. Then we also mark the same position to mark the reference point on this crossover strap. If you want to adjust the decorative part, you can also do it after finishing the pants. But it's easier to sew if you stitch it at this step directly. Here, I'll first add the decoration to the cross strap on the right, the very bottom position of the cross strap. In a moment, we'll align it with this marking point. Here I used a 1 centimeter lace trim. Here I directly folded it along this position. Trim off the excess part. Iron the pressed edge. Align directly to the position mentioned earlier. I sewed several buttons here in the middle. Then I sewed short lines of stitching on both sides to secure it. Then on the other side, we need to prepare a bow. The fabric width for the bow is shown on my pattern. Everyone can refer to it. Make the bow shape by hand. Adjust it to your preferred size. After making the adjustments, The excess length can be trimmed off. At the cutting point, we tear a bit of frayed edge, then sew it onto the mark on the left pant leg. Here I sewed a little in the middle. Then I sewed a little at the two spots closer to the sides. The sewing spots are on the back side of this bow. The front should not show the stitches or seams. There's no special technique needed for sewing. Just sew it yourself, old goo. Continue for a moment, then we draw these two lines separately on both pant legs. Then take out the long pocket prepared according to these two lines. Fold inward along the two long stitch lines without folding it to the reverse side. Once folded, press it with an iron. After ironing, the width aligns with the distance between these two lines. Then we secure the edge stitching, the thread on one side of the stitching. Then we first open this part. Trim the inside allowances. It's also okay not to trim, but if you don't trim it, this part might end up being thicker, especially if the twill fabric you're using is relatively thick. You definitely need to trim the seam allowance at the position that was just sewn. Then trim the part on the other side that hasn't been stitched yet. Trim the part where there is no stitching. Leave at least 3 millimeters remaining. I'll also explain why we don't trim it from the start. When trimming at the very beginning, sometimes when we fold or trim it, it feels like the edges easily become uneven. But if you feel confident, you can also trim the shape properly right from the beginning, and then trim both sides. Next, we fold this part back, then sew along the edge on this side to fix it in place. After measuring, the excess fabric on both sides beyond the fabric's edge can be trimmed off. After properly preparing this position on both fabric pieces, we now align the two fabric pieces with their fronts facing each other. First, sew the front crotch area. After sewing, make several notches at the curved areas. Then we unfold the two fabric pieces. The pleat in the middle is split towards both sides. Next, we need to fold down the waistband at this position. Then sew the channel to insert this elastic band. But at this position, there are 3 pleats here. It's quite easy when we put on elastic bands to get stuck because of this seam. So we can trim the seam at this spot and trim it a bit. You can first fold it down like this. Take a look at the approximate range. Just trim the section within this range. After trimming, it looks like this. Then we fold it down along this crease line. After folding, you can press the crease with a blending and ironing Then let's flip to the front and take a look. There's a note written at this position on the waistband in our drawing. It indicates positions a few millimeters away from the crease on both sides. There is a line on each side. For example, 3 millimeters. That is the first edge of this fabric. It is 3 millimeters from this marking. Then the second position is, for example, 8 millimeters. That is the second position. It is 8 millimeters from the edge of this fabric. Everything is aligned with the edge of this fabric. After sewing, it looks like this. Then we need to insert it between these two lines. And also at these two positions. Thread elastic bands through each of these points. I use a sewing machine for the elastic. If you have other tools, you can also use other tools. After threading it through, we secure both edges. Sew a few stitches slightly inward. First, secure the elastic band. Then pay attention to the elastic band at the pants hem. I cut this elastic band to be relatively long because I didn't make this part particularly narrow. Although the gathered edge effect is applied, it is gathered only slightly. Of course, if you prefer it gathered tightly, then you can shorten this elastic band. Make sure to thread the elastic bands properly. It looks just like this. Then we align them face to face like this and fold them back together. Here is the position where we sew and press after sewing. Stitching. We also make some notches at the curved areas. Then we pull the two pant legs apart like this to the left and right. At the seam in the middle, pull it apart towards both sides. Align the top and bottom. Pull the left pant leg all the way down. Then pull it over to the right pant leg. After pulling it properly, sew a few basting stitches at this position on the hem. Then we turn the pants right side out, neatly smooth and iron it yourself. This part of the pants is now complete. Here, I'll demonstrate how to use the back stitch method. It's quite suitable for embroidering letters like these. I'll start with the straight section at the top. I'll give a brief explanation. We bring the needle and thread up from the very bottom edge. Then we move about 3 millimeters to the side. If you are embroidering very small letters, you can make the spacing even narrower. Just try to keep it as even as possible. Continue forward, spacing about 3 millimeters apart. Insert the needle from the back, then we go into this stitch at the front. Insert the needle into the same hole like this. This way the thread connects. Next, we look at the stitch line visible from the front. Insert the needle about 3 millimeters to the side like this. Continue stitching down at the position of this previous stitch. We will keep repeating this step for the remaining part until we have fully embroidered the part we need. Now I'll stitch this letter here. The method for embroidering letters is the same. It's just that for this letter of ours, it might sometimes have some curves. At the places where there are curves, you just follow along those curved parts. For example, if there is some curvature, you embroider with a spacing of about 3 millimeters. It might say that's a bit too wide. Then there are some spots. You just change it to 2 millimeters. Try to make the curved areas as smooth as possible. It looks more natural, a bit more flexible. You don't have to. Each step is exactly 3 millimeters. For the rest, just keep repeating the steps yourself. Just finish embroidering it. Wow. Here, will make the adjustable neck strap for the fabric strip size provided in the pattern does not include normally add a 5 millimeter seam allowance yourself. Then we fold it in half. The side folded inward is the right side. The side facing up is the wrong side. Flip it over shortly. Normally we sew along this 5 millimeter seam here, but to make it easier to turn this bag inside out, we need to do some adjustments at the top part. At the beginning here, we cut diagonally like this. Then we move closer to the end. Sew a few stitches to fix it in place. Do not cut the thread ends. Leave the thread ends long. The thread end should be slightly longer than the whole strip of fabric. We must sew this part securely because we will pull this part to turn it inside out shortly. If you don't sew it securely, it will come off the moment you pull it. After sewing here, this area looks like this. Then we unfold the fabric. Fold down this upper part like this. Then fold it back together. A very long thread tail. We need to place it at the very inside. When we sew it later, we must not sew over this thread. Then the part that we fold down should be sewn starting slightly lower. Sew along the pleat line located 5 millimeters Here from we have marked the pleat line position again. You can draw the thread end on top yourself. Be sure to tuck it in as deep as possible. After measuring, trim the pleat. Just leave about 2 to 3 millimeters. Then we pull this long thread downward. Flip this entire strip of fabric over once. The top part doesn't look very good. You can trim it off. The size after trimming. It's written on our drawing. This length includes a reserved part. How much is actually used? That is, after we have finished trimming, the size of this strip of cloth must be at least as specified in our drawing. What is the actual size used in centimeters? For example, the actual use is 30 centimeters. Then the leftover part of this strip of cloth must be 30 centimeters. Then we straighten and iron the fabric strip. Its fastening position is on the side. Next, we thread the elastic band through it. You can adjust the size of the elastic band based on your needs, because the size of each doll's head may vary. This wig is particularly thick in some areas. Some parts are particularly Everyone thin. Can check if any adjustments are needed. After threading the elastic band through, we sew and secure both ends to fix it in place. This is what the finished elastic band looks like. Then set this part aside for now. After repairing the letters on the eye mask, it looks like this. Then we cut according to the size of the eye mask. Cut a piece of this adhesive cotton padding. If you don't have this at home and don't want to buy it, you can use cotton to stuff it in the end. But you need to be careful when using cotton plugs. Its evenness is not as good as that of adhesive-backed cotton. The finished product should have better flatness. Be careful when cutting. We compare it to the line we drew. Cut about 2 millimeters inward. Make it slightly smaller. Wait until we finish pressing the garment. It's not easy to sew to the edge. Take a look at this remaining part. It can clearly see the line I just drew along the edge. You can compare it with the fabric we simulated. Take a look and compare. You can clearly tell the difference. It's slightly smaller than the line drawn on the outer edge, because this needs to be ironed onto the back of the fabric. So how can we iron it on? This position will be more precise. If the fabric used is somewhat transparent, You might be able to see the stitching from the back as well. This fabric, like mine, is impermeable. Then we use a needle to poke small holes along the edge. You can poke several small holes in different spots. This makes it easier to align. Then we lay the batting on the back side. Align this hole position and iron it on. This is adhesive-backed padding. One side of it has adhesive. The adhesive side faces the fabric. This is also because it has adhesive. So I said this is better than using cotton. After making this eye mask, it should be smoother. If cotton is used, some areas may be thicker and some areas may be thinner. The front side must also be ironed. Then I'm using a lace chow pen here. After ironing this line on the front side, I also can't see it anymore because I made this small hole earlier. Next, we align with this small hole. Also redraw this front line. The marking points on both sides indicate where we adjust the tension cover. We also mark those points. Then we use a piece of mesh fabric, place it directly over this pattern. Its size just needs to be slightly larger than this eye mask. Use a bamboo pillow to secure it. Actually, we are basically treating these two layers of fabric as one single layer when handling them. Next, we need to sew on some lace. Regarding the lace, there will definitely be a seam somewhere. For example, at this spot here, this is where I plan to place the bow. Then I can place the seam right here. Later, the bow can cover this spot. Or like some of mine, I place the bow on the other side. Then I can also put the seam on the other side. So you can plan ahead where to put the bow. Then decide where to put the joint. When sewing the lace, leave about 2 centimeters of space in front of this lace. Do not sew it so that we can conveniently manage the position of this joint afterward. It's when we sew on this lace, leave a gap like this in front of the lace. When sewing the lace, the seam of this lace should face to the right. Then on the left side is a part where the lace shows. Sew continuously along the edge line below all the way around. Then let's look at the start and end positions of the lace. They are adjacent. Then we take the starting and ending lace, align them together like this. Sew vertically downwards, sew close to the edge of this fabric. After sewing, leave about 3 millimeters for the seam allowance. Trim off the excess lace. Use an iron to press it. Separate the seam allowance of this lace to both sides. This will make it lie flatter. Then, for the curved area of this lace's seam allowance, we clip the seam allowance straight inward like this. Do not trim with pinking shears. If you trim elastic lace with pinking shears, then when you gently pull the lace on the front, it will fall apart. Because I didn't trim the front edge of this fabric, it's somewhat bigger and faster. I'll trim this part a little smaller first. Then take out the elastic band piece we made earlier. Secure both ends at the marked points on each side. This is a temporary fix here. The line we've fixed is try to move it slightly to the side. Do not sew within the seam allowance of the lace. Then we move the excess elastic in the middle upwards, because this spot is our turning opening. Later, when we measure the seam, this spot won't be included. Leave about this much of a turn up. If you're not very good at flipping the fabric over, leave a slightly larger turn up. When sewing later, the section between sewing from this point to that point will be left open. Then we take out another piece of fabric. Two pieces of fabric, place them face to face like this. Sew around along the line where we just stitched the lace. Be careful not to sew the opening at the top. There is one more issue. It's the eye mask you see in the video now. I didn't add any padding because I made many eye masks. I tried using cotton on some of them to see the effect. In the end, I believe using batting produces the best effect if batting is used. So now what we see on top is this layer, which contains a layer of batting. There is also this elastic band in the middle. It might be a bit puffy. So when we measure the seam, use your hand to slightly press down the position of the elastic band. After measuring, we trim the fabric. Be careful not to cut this elastic band. Divide into 2 layers and trim them separately. Leave a standard 5 mm seam allowance. Leave a 3 mm seam allowance at the remaining positions. Then use scissors to make straight inward cuts. Is it because there's lace in the middle? If you cut along the lace, if you trim off the edges of this lace, then the lace inside will easily unravel. We make neat cuts at all the curved areas. Then turn the entire eye mask right side out from the opening. Give the whole eye mask a quick ironing. And if you don't have quilted cotton batting, you need to fill some cotton inside. Here, I'll also show you all a quick look. If the effect comes from cotton padding, pay attention to the previous steps in the video. Iron the cotton padding. You don't need to add more cotton here. Finally, check all the top stitching along the edges of the eye mask yourself. If there is no marked line, then sew the opening using the long stitch. I don't know if it's clear for you to see in the video. When I look at the food myself, the surface of the stuffed cotton will have some wrinkles. It doesn't mean the batting is laid out perfectly flat. And we tie a bow by hand and sew it onto the spot where you need it. Here, let's look at the fabric strip pattern. Since it doesn't fit on an A4 sheet, it's split into 2 halves, so we need to pinch the middle. We draw the pattern on one piece of fabric, leaving an opening. I keep my opening roughly in the center. When sewing to the pointed corners on both sides, insert a thread inside. This helps to turn the piece inside out more easily. If you're unsure how to insert the thread, check the folder where there's a separate item demonstrating sew along the side seams. When sewing, place the right sides of the 2 identical fabric pieces facing each other. Leave a 5 mm seam allowance at the opening, about 2 to 3 mm elsewhere, trimming as needed. Also, trim slightly at the seam allowance of the pointed corners on both sides. Next, we flip it over from the reverse opening and pull out the thread we inserted earlier, so the pointed tip comes out as well. Then we carefully arrange and iron the entire bias tape flat. Let's make this mesh decoration here. Based on the size of this square, cut a piece of mesh fabric of the same size. We need to sew it on in the same position. Before sewing, we can first add a decoration underneath. You can first sketch the position of this rectangle. Then I used a heat transfer print on this part. If you like, you can also decorate it like that eye mask. Letters on the sleeves or other decorations also work. After ironing the transfer onto it, we cover it with this mesh fabric on top. at the edges of the mesh fabric. This is how I sew it to secure it in place. I sewed 2 buttons here on both edges. This is the position to sew the button on the right side. We can first use sewing thread, hand tie a bow. After fixing the bow in this position, we will sew the button on. When sewing, we insert the needle backwards from the side. This way, we can tuck the thread ends inside the seam tape. After completing the mesh decoration, we measure the stitch length at this spot, then mark this line at the same spot on the seam tape. Fold this line like a bend, then compare the crossing above it, and mark the positions of these 2 short lines. Then we use needle and thread to sew this spot. Sew to create this crossing point, and the 2 short stitches beside it. Similarly, insert the needle from the opening at this position. Hide the thread end inside. When sewing, avoid stitching through the bottom layer of the fabric. If you sew through to the bottom layer of the fabric, stitching from the back side. After sewing the intersecting point properly, we then sew the 2 short stitches beside it. Half of these spots are sewn onto the folded area. The other half is sewn onto the adjacent fabric. After sewing the 2 short stitches, if you want to change the thread, we will secure the stitch here because I use a different thread to sew the buttons. If you don't mind, you can use the same thread. You're heading straight to the side again. Just sew on another button for decoration. This is how the button looks once sewn on. Next, these 2 positions on our strap are the positions where I have now marked with black dots. On our drawing, it shows a clasp. This is where we sew the snap button. We directly cover it with this decorated strap like this. Align the top edge of the strap with the drawing underneath. Then we mark the strap position corresponding to this buckle location on the back side. Then we sew a snap button at the marked point. Pay attention to where you mark the point. The snap button should be sewn exactly at that position. It's fine if the snap button stitching is visible from the front here, because I still need to fasten it on this side. So I didn't hide the stitching. Here we fold both sides like this. The side folded in is the front of this tape. Then here I use a slightly thicker thread. Insert the needle from a point slightly more inward to the outside. Hide the thread end inside a bit. Then we bring this part together like this. Sew 2 stitches vertically and a few short stitches. For instance, you start by sewing 2 stitches. You feel that 2 stitches aren't sufficient. Then you can sew 1 more stitch. This serves to bring this side together. The other one serves as a decoration. You can decide how many stitches to sew based on your preference. For instance, I sometimes use 2 stitches. Finally, place 3. The last thread at the center of the 2-layer strap. We will gather some stitches on the inside section. After gathering the stitches, close it up and tidy it up. It's like this. On the other side, we repeat the process to handle this side as well. Finally, fasten the snaps on both sides and the strap is done.